The rancher noticed her by accident, the way most truths first appear, not announced but revealed when you aren't looking for them, and Thomas Caldwell slowed his horse at the edge of the cottonwoods. Because something about the scene caught him wrong, a woman crouched behind a collapsed shed near the creek, her back turned, shoulders thin beneath a faded shawl. 3 small children huddled close, like birds against the cold, and Thomas would have ridden on if he hadn't seen what she placed into their hands: scraps wrapped carefully in cloth, crusts softened with creek water, portions measured so evenly it hurt to see, because you only portion food like that when there isn't enough. And Thomas felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the same one he'd felt as a boy when his own mother pretended she wasn't hungry, and he watched long enough to understand this wasn't carelessness or failure, but quiet endurance. The woman whispering to her children as if the scraps were a feast, smiling while her hands trembled, and Thomas turned his horse away before she could see him, because pity was a loud thing, and he didn't want to bring it crashing down on her dignity. But the image followed him back to his ranch, followed him through the barn where grain bins were full, through the smokehouse heavy with cured meat, through the kitchen where his table waited empty every night since his wife passed, and that night he didn't sleep much, because generosity done wrong can wound as deeply as neglect. And Thomas knew that if he rode up with charity in his hands and questions on his tongue, he would take something from her she might never get back. So he waited until dawn and filled a basket instead, not with excess but with care, flour wrapped tight, apples without bruises, smoked beef, beans, bread still warm, even a bit of sugar folded into cloth like a secret. And he sent it by a hired boy with instructions that mattered more than the food itself. Leave it at the shed, no names, no watching, no questions. And the boy asked why, and Thomas told him that some help only helps if it arrives quietly. And later that day Thomas rode past the cottonwoods again, and did not slow this time, but he saw her all the same, standing very still beside the basket, one hand pressed to her mouth as if to hold herself together, the children peering in wonder, and Thomas kept riding, because kindness sometimes means knowing when not to be seen. And if you want to understand how a single unseen act can change more than one life, subscribe now, because this story has only just begun. The basket returned the next morning, not empty but altered, a loaf of bread sliced and rewrapped, 2 apples missing, a small note tucked beneath the cloth, written in careful hand, thanking whoever had sent it and promising to share it wisely. And Thomas stood in his kitchen holding the note longer than he meant to, struck by the restraint of it, the pride, the refusal to take more than was needed, and he sent another basket 2 days later and another after that. Never more than would feel safe to accept, never with his name, and weeks passed and winter softened, and the children began to look like children again, cheeks fuller, laughter louder, and Thomas watched from a distance without letting himself believe he was owed anything for it, because the best kindness asks for nothing back. And one afternoon a storm broke sudden and hard, and Thomas rode out to bring his cattle in, only to find the creek swollen and a child's cry cutting through the rain, and he followed the sound to the collapsed shed where one of the boys had slipped near the water, and Thomas reached him just in time, hauling him up soaked and shaking. And when the woman ran toward them, her face went pale with fear before settling into something like recognition, not of his face but of the way he moved, careful, steady, and she thanked him with the same quiet dignity she'd shown the basket. And Thomas only nodded, handing the boy back, and for the first time they spoke more than a few words. Her name was Sarah Whitmore, widowed 2 winters past, husband lost to a logging accident, work scarce, pride intact, and Thomas listened more than he spoke, because listening is another kind of giving. And after that day the baskets stopped, not because the need ended, but because something else replaced them: eggs traded for mending, grain shared for work done, help offered without ceremony. And the town never learned who had first filled the basket, because Thomas never told, and Sarah never asked, And what grew between them wasn't debt or gratitude but respect, the slow understanding that survival didn't have to be lonely. And years later, when someone remarked on how Sarah's children had grown strong and kind, Thomas only smiled and said that people did better when they were fed. And if this story of quiet generosity and dignity touched you, subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories where the smallest acts leave the deepest marks.